where as a young girl, she rubbed shoulders with children of high-ranking officials of the Third Reich. She even shook hands with none other than Adolf himself and remarked to her mom that his handshake was flabby. Her mom asked her if she would please keep that observation to herself. Now here is B to tell us what life was like in Europe and Germany after the war was over.
All I can say, you're a very patient crowd. How many of you were here when I gave my last talk? All right. There's some that are missing a big lot, but if I start reaching back into Kansas, we'll be here till midnight. So what Jim just said is it was circumstantial that our family moved from Munich to this mountain village in Bavaria because Adolf Hitler's birthday came and his secretary wanted to do something spectacular to build a house on top of a very high mountain, not a dwelling but a tea house. And I needed an architect to help build an elevator inside of a mountain because there was no room to put a road all the way to the top. And my father was either unlucky or very fortunate to get the commission, and he moved us all from Munich out of the city. Let's see if we can get the little village on. Into this very pretty bucolic township. We potentially didn't live in the village because my dad's job was considered a security issue, so we had to live in the compound that Hitler established over the years. That's my dad. That's my dad. And this adoring child was me, it must have been about 8. That's it. That's Baptist Garden. Any of you ever been there?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, I remember you telling me last time. Yes. Anyway, there's the village down there. And where the photo was taken is approximately the elevation where Hitler's house was. Long story, as I said, if I start going, then I'll be back rehashing the whole thing. What I really want to talk to you about tonight is what happened after. And in certain aspects, because of the way we lived a very sheltered life up on that hillside. The rest of Germany was bombed repeatedly, and we escaped that because my sister's fiancé was a pilot. He said, the valley is too narrow. These flyers can't swoop in and out and drop their bombs. They would have to drop them indiscriminately. Anyway, we felt safe. We had our restrictions. We couldn't have visitors, only close family. My mother was going crazy. And but it was a secure life. As a child, I see it from the perspective of a child. Funny thing was, we were bombed on the 25th of April, 1945, 5 minutes before the war ended, literally. The war ended on the 5th of May, 1945. So, reality set in, okay? I went to school, there was one store up on that hillside where Hitler had his house. It was called Obersalzberg, Upper Salt Mountain. We did our shopping up there. Butcher shop was only down in the valley. My dad had a friend, he had a butcher shop, so we got our meat delivered up into a military establishment where we picked up our meat every weekend, because by that, of course, it was rationing, and you were lucky if you had a roast for the weekend. But that was all acceptable. We were safe. We heard very little about the war because all the media was, of course, controlled by the government. You learned what they wanted you to know. There were some people outside this very restricted area, and I won't even doubt that even in a little township in Berchtesgaden there were people that had radios that they could draw in, BBC and other informative channels that were saying other things than what we were told. But we were told the Germans are winning and everything is wonderful, and until Hitler made the colossal mistake to go to Russia, and that was the beginning of the end. Once again, I get sidetracked. I get so involved in this thing. All right, after the bombing, and maybe I told you we were excused from school on the 25th of April, and we were rushed up onto the hill, and we had underground bunkers, air raid bunkers. My mother never would go in a bunker. She just, I don't know whether she was claustrophobic or not, but that particular day she must have had sixth sense, because she went into the bunker with the papers. She had papers ready in the bag, so she grabbed her bag, and she was fortunate enough to think that we had feather beds. You know, we slept with duvets, tossed them all down into the cellar for some reason or other. Everything else was left. So when we came out of our air raid shelters, and my dad found me in the particular one where they brought us to from school, he told me right off the bat, the house is gone, but mother and your sister are fine. Okay. It was devastation. I look at pictures of Moore, Oklahoma, and it looked something like that, only it wasn't wood that was on the ground, it was cinder blocks and bricks and roof tiles, but it was total destruction, okay? What we had left was in the cellar, the feather beds and mother's canned goods. She would can vigorously. Being May, we had probably eaten most of it by that time during the winter, okay? So what to do? The roads were impassable. My father had a motorcycle with a sidecar, and he transported as much as he could. First of all, we had to carry what we thought we could save to a passable road. We were so fortunate. It was May, it was warm, it was sunny. Can you imagine torrential rains and you had to do this sort of thing? I think we were all in sort of a shock mood. Nobody gave any thought was going to happen next. You just did what you had to. My dad said, we got to find lodgings. There's no place to sleep. There's no place to live. Like in Moore, what did these people do? Where did they go to bed? And the next storm was coming 5 days later. Anyway, that particular night we had another air raid, but this time no bombs were dropped. But the people were like ants going for the underground shelters. It takes one example and you get religion, right? Anyway, my dad said there's a man down in a valley. Okay, right here is a road that goes into Austria. Right there. Over here is a township called Salzburg, and that's in Austria. And let's say down here by the river, by the way, there's a river here. That's why the fog follows the water on the river. Let's say that's the house. He said he has a couple of small rooms in the attic. He will take us in, okay? So we walked to a place where Dad could drive to with his motorcycle, and he took us, my mother in the sidecar, my sister on the seat on the back of him, and me sitting on the wheel of the sidecar. It was exciting, but my family didn't see it as such. He took us down there with whatever we had, okay? It was a roof over our head. That's about all. My dad would leave very early in the morning, had no idea where he went, what he was doing. He scrounged gasoline because he figured that's keep him mobile. He could look for another place to live. He knew we couldn't stay here. This is a temporary shelter, okay? All right, I told you the story. We were on the 5th of May. It was a beautiful day, like today. We heard this rumbling because the highway was right out there, okay? And we came out and we said, what is this noise? And the tanks came by. Maybe you remember me telling you this. And we were deathly frightened because the tanks had a star on it. And it had been drummed into us from the beginning of the war. If the Russians ever take over, life is over for you. You have no expectation to survive that, okay? So we thought the Russians had come, and I said this before, if we would have had a pill, we would all have swallowed it because it would have been easier than to live through a Russian occupation. And I tell you, the people in East Germany, in Poland, in Czech Republic, in all these countries that have been liberated by the Russians, they would agree with us. It was sheer hell, okay? The Russians were vindictive, and I don't blame them because they had been assaulted and taken over, and they had every reason to take it out on the remaining population. Anyway, we moved in there, and with a star on the thing, and then on one of the tanks there was a black soldier, and we finally said, no, the Russians don't have Negroes in there. Okay, so it's got to be the Americans. We were never so glad in all our lives that it was the Americans, okay?
Yeah.
This thing, yes, I mean, I'm not, there were incidents, let's face it. In every army, there are individuals that have their own agenda, okay? And maybe I told you this before, just shut me up if I'm repeating myself. There was a soldier, and he had wedding rings lined up on his tie. And I'm sure the woman or the man that he took them from didn't say, would you like my wedding ring? I really have no use for it anymore. I'm a widow, I'm a war widow, I don't need my ring anymore. Yeah. Anyway, across the street from us, there was the river, there was a camp, a labor camp for, when I say labor camp, it wasn't forced labor. It was just a camp for laborers, okay? And there were women there, waitresses and cooks that cooked for these men that were building the bunkers up on the hill. We would hear them scream at night. I had an 18-year-old sister. She was petrified. My mother was petrified. I was 12 years old and naive, believe it or not. 60, 80, no, let's put it this way. 78 years ago, a 12-year-old was a child over there. And I had no idea why you would have to be afraid. But it was very, very hard for my mother and my sister. I remember one incident. She worked for a construction company. And of course the headquarters up on the hill was gone, bombed. They retreated to their original point in the vicinity of Salzburg in Austria. And the path to that little town was going through a bucolic valley with a little brook running through, a sand path. Couldn't even drive a car down there. And my mother said, go with your sister. I mean, she wanted me out of her hair. Protection I certainly wasn't providing. So the two of us hoofed it through the mountains to that village, and my sister got her last paycheck. A long walk, couple of hours, okay? On the way back, a tank, believe it or not, a tank came up this wall. And there was in different locations, there were little benches along this little path because people got so tired walking this street, they had to sit down. There's an old woman sitting there. And there's my sister, and I could tell she was deathly afraid. And this old lady said to us, "You afraid, girls? You know, if you scream, I can't help you." Well, that was the most encouraging. I couldn't figure out why I would scream, but my sister certainly knew, okay? So we just sat on this bench and shaking in our shoes, and with that, from the direction that we had come 5 ex-German soldiers. All they had on was their uniform, pants, and a shirt. No insignias, nothing else, no weapons. They were probably walking home from goodness knows where. And they saw us sitting there, and there was the tank down there with the soldiers sitting on top. Okay, they rode on the top. And they said, "Girls, you scared?" "Oh, of course we're scared." You know, I said, "No, that's all right. They're okay. Come on, we'll get by there." And we climbed up over the banking and around the tank and down the other side. And the Americans sat there and roared with laughter and didn't bother us in the least, but we got around there. But these were incidents that made life extremely uncertain. Okay, first of all, there was no food. Okay? We had all the money we needed, and we still had some rationing cards that were valid. But because we were new in this community, we came from up on that unholy hill, and everybody in the village thought we were an elite people that lived in a lap of luxury, had everything we wanted, okay, and really looked down on us as in every aspect. We had no relationship to any of the stores in town, so consequently, if one of us walked in, they didn't know us. No. And you asked for bread, was available. It was not always edible, but it was available. They made bread out of everything. I guarantee you some of it was sawdust, but it filled the hole, right? Okay, but if you needed butter or sugar or, God forbid, eggs, sorry, we're sold out, okay? So, okay, what do? You just open another can of green beans that had slightly gone off, and nobody really wanted to even eat it, but you had nothing else, so you ate whatever you could find. Dandelion greens weren't bad, believe it or not, especially when you put them in, when you steamed them. Okay, but at this point, we didn't even have a kitchen to cook. This went on, I would say, for about 3 weeks, and then my dad said, "I found a dwelling." Okay, I found a place where we could move into. It was high time because the people that had originally taken us in had suddenly realized that we were Nazis, and it would be detrimental to their good name in the community if they harbored us. So the sooner we were ready to go, the happier they were. Okay, so what Dad had found, Dad was always on the move, okay? And not only was he looking for gasoline, he was scared out of his wits because he figured, okay, I'm one of those that are gonna line up against the wall and shoot because I was closely related to the regime. I was involved, okay? Well, by that time, the troops had come in, and the officers, Berchtesgaden was declared headquarters of the High Command of Southern Bavaria, okay, and guess what? Up on that hill, there was this house, this tea house, and there was an elevator that didn't function because 2 or 3 weeks prior, mercenary troops from France had come in, independent of the American army. They had found a liquor lockers in what was left, I don't know where, probably in the ruins of Hitler's or Bormann's house. And they had imbibed to the point that they didn't really know what they were doing anymore, but they got up into the house, not through the elevator, because that was covered with snow, but they scrambled up there. They saw that the elevator door on top was closed, and when that meant that the cabin was down below. So they said, okay, Hitler is hiding in there. They shot the door open. They saw strands of wires and cables, and because the house was so exposed to the elements, there were cement bags everywhere to make repairs. So they hauled the cement in, dropped it down onto the cabin, and guess what? The cement sacks opened up, and all this fine stuff came out and attached itself to all the strands of wires and cables, and the elevator didn't work. Okay. So the word went out, there's a man somewhere in the community that knows how to run this thing. Okay, everybody says, where's George Meyer? And George Meyer thought, okay, they're after me. And the more they looked for him, the more where he was hiding. But finally, they caught up with him. And the officer, his name was, the American officer was Captain Snyder. Wonderful man. I mean it, sincerely. He kept a lot of kids alive. I'll tell you after. He got a hold of Dad and through an interpreter said, you need to fix this elevator. And Father had enough gumption to say, I'm sorry, I can't. I gotta look for a place to live for my family. He says, well, there must be some kind of a home left up there or anywhere in the vicinity that you can bring your family to. And Dad said, yes, it's the former home of Albert Speer, the Minister for Armament. All right, he said, move in. Yes, I would, but we have absolutely nothing. We have no beds, no table, no chair, nothing to sit on, not a pot to cook in. And Captain Snyder says, find whatever you can. If somebody tries to stop you, send them to me. Okay, Dad with his little motorcycle and his sidecar was scrounging the neighborhood. He would move stuff like you wouldn't believe. Everything but a couch and a refrigerator. Wouldn't have helped anyway because there was no electricity. But we got out of this situation into this house. This house, okay, let's scroll through here, through there. It'll be quite in the middle somewhere that I show you what that house looked like. That's Hitler's house. That's after they rebuilt it. That's after the bombing. These are some of the spots. It's a hotel. That is Hitler's house, and that was where the Gestapo was. Hitler and the kids in the area. I'm not in there, but this girl and this boy were Albert Speer's children. Okay, some more. That's myself and Goebbels. Joseph Goebbels, Minister of Propaganda. Nice kids, those three. Okay, me again. The woman that took the picture had an issue with these girls, and she put me in the middle in a chair. Oh. And the others were standing there. It's fun. She's the only way she could get rid of her feelings. Anyway, Göring and his wife and their child, that was his house, very close, all in the same vicinity. After the bombing, they knew exactly where everything was, so they bombed everything of importance further. That was Bormann, and that's his son. Hitler, Eva Braun, I don't know who the girls are. This is the Speer house. That used to be called Haus Woltenberg, and it was a recuperation home for children with respiratory illness. Speer took it over. Down the bottom of the hill was his office. He had a large studio because he was planning to reconstruct Berlin in a fascist way. He was told he wasn't involved like some of the others. He was not. In my eyes, I saw him as an artist, and he did what he had to in order to do what he wanted to do. Anyway, we moved into this spot. This was the bottom area where there was living room, dining room, a kitchen over here. In the middle was the bedrooms of the Speers and their children, and upstairs is where the help lived. But we felt most secure being on top. We couldn't lock the doors because the keys were all gone, okay? So this thing was always open during the night. And it took, I don't know how long, I would say months before we were able to take one of the doors in the house and installed it at the bottom of the stairs that were going up to this, so we had at least some kind of a security. Okay. Pretty spot. Down the bottom of the hill was a farm, experimental farm where we were able to get milk. We could go, I think it was twice a week, with a container and collect milk. And the milk was it had no fat contents. I don't know why. I don't think they, does it have anything to do with cows if they don't give fatty milk? I don't know, but it was as blue as your jacket. Anyway, but at least we had milk. All right, we had bread and we had milk and we had dandelion greens. It was becoming June by then, and there were little bitty apples on these apple trees here. There was an orchard right down here. The worst part was the water supply was interrupted, so our drinking water was tainted, and we all had dysentery. And in connection with green apples, the results was overwhelming. Okay? At least we had a flush toilet. We had water supply. It was just, it shouldn't, we boiled it because that's the only way we felt we could get rid of this thing. All right, so we sat up there and Dad was working for the American Army up in the Eagle's Nest, and he recruited whoever he could to help clean the strains of this elevator. Got it going because Dwight Eisenhower was going to show up, and they wanted him to ride up in that elevator. By the way, he took also 2 chairs out of the Eagle's Nest to bring home. So, I mean, comfortable chairs, okay? Not just kitchen chairs. He packed them on top of that little, you have no idea, he looked hilarious. One time he brought a box, the size of this lectern, about this high, and it was full of cubes of dried soup. Elation. Until 5 months later when we couldn't smell the stuff anymore. 2 flavors, pea soup and spring soup. I don't know what part of spring was in that soup. But I mean, if you're hungry enough, you eat anything, right? My mother, I was 12, okay. I was forever hungry. And she had this gentle way of halfway through her meal, whatever it was, she would push it off and she said, I just can't eat this anymore. Would you like it? Of course, pass it over, you know. She just knew a young kid needed nourishment. My sister, I don't know how she managed, but none of us, I didn't get ill. I lost some of my teeth because something was lacking in the diet, okay? But I don't have rickets, I don't have a debilitating illness. We made it through. It's amazing. My mother she was 90 pounds soaking wet. She couldn't go down into the village and shop. So for a whole year we had no school, believe it or not, a whole year. I mean, there was nothing wrong with the with the village down below, not one bomb fell into the village, but school was canceled. Don't ask me why. I was going to high school by that time. German system is 4 years of grade school, then you can pass a test if you want to go to high school, which you had to pay for in those days, not anymore. And also, no, university is free in Germany too, if you keep up your grades. If you don't, they ask you to leave. Anyway, she said, she sent me shopping. And there again, I would show up, I had my money, and I'd stood in line for hours because that's what everybody else did. And when I got into the counter, everything was gone. And it was not only, I was angry because I was looking forward to food. I never gave it a thought that I was discriminated against. I figured, well, they ran out of food, and that was that, okay? I'm gonna, before I get turned off again, all right. Okay, one incident that was really interesting. Because the army was up in that area where Hitler had his home, and there was a beautiful old hotel. No, it was an old hotel that had been transferred into a very modern, beautiful hotel that held soldiers on sick leave during the war, okay? Was damaged, but not bad enough that it can't be used. That's where Captain Snyder moved in with his troops. And Captain Snyder was a fighting soldier. He was not the soldiers that came after not an occupational soldier. Captain Snyder knew what war meant in a totally different way. And of course, there was everything there for the soldiers to eat, and they didn't eat everything, and stuff was left. Like, for instance, pancake batter, which was something we didn't know that anybody ate in the morning for breakfast, because we used to have a roll and a cup of cocoa and a cup of coffee, what they called coffee in those days, and that was our breakfast. But American soldiers ate pancakes. And there was gallons of pancake batter left. And Captain Snyder said, bring a container. Children only could come with a container and collect what was left over. You have no idea how far children would walk to get whatever was left, because it sustained some of them to a better time, for a better time. The occupational officer after, oh, by the way, Captain Snyder was Jewish. He had absolutely every reason to be vindictive, but he wasn't. He was a kind man. The man that came after him, he poured gasoline on the stuff. Okay, all the freebies were gone. Anyway, all right. So in order to sort of, there were checkpoints before the war ended all over the place because it was a strict restricted area. Well, there were army posts now at these checkpoints. And my sister and I used to have to come down here and around here where the main road down to town was. In the little below there was another checkpoint. All right, we were walking down the road, I shall never forget it. And the guy's in his little guardhouse, and we just walked by, and when we were down the road, maybe half the length of this room, he came out and yelled, "Halt!" And we looked back, and he had his gun, and we said, "What's wrong with this guy?" And we just kept going. We were just young people going to town hoping to find some groceries. You know what this guy did? He shot into the street. Okay? Bullets ricocheting all over the place. Well, we ran like we had never run before. Fortunately, the road is curvy, and he couldn't leave his post to go after us. Can you believe that? Anyway, but that's war. That is war. This is what the sickest part about is, because people forget that we're all mortal and we all bleed when we were cut and all of that. It was a crazy time. Anyway, going back to school now, when they finally opened again, in the meantime, when you're 12 and going on 13, you grow like a weed, and suddenly my shoes didn't fit anymore. This is all personal, okay? All my memories are personal. Okay, you think you could get a pair of shoes anywhere? Absolutely nothing. First of all, if you wanted eggs, butter, and maybe slice of bacon or something, you went to a farmer. These farmers were milk farmers, okay? But they all kept chickens and pigs and all that, so the farmer would say, what you got to trade? All right, what have I got to trade? My mother, we didn't even have clothes anymore, because it was all, we didn't keep our clothes in the cellar, and what was above the cellar was all gone. Well, he said, you got Persian rugs? Yeah, well, no. Have you got gold? My wedding ring. And I'm not giving that up. Well, sorry. They had specific things they wanted. Milk of human kindness did not flow in their veins, but we still survived, okay? So, where do I get a pair of shoes? Summer was easy. When we were living up there and I didn't have to go to school, I went barefoot, all right? That helped, that worked. But when it became fall and winter, that option was removed. So Dad had a pair of boots. And they were a yellow that was downright disgusting. But it was the only thing that I had to put on my feet, okay? And believe it or not, the war ended in 1945, and until the currency was changed in 1947, when all the money that you had became literally worthless. It wasn't an exchange for 1 for 1, or maybe 1 for 5 or 1 for 10. It was just what you had prior to that didn't matter. You were allotted 40 D-Mark, Deutsche Mark, and that's per person. And that's what you had to work with until you had your next paycheck, where you were paid in D-Mark. Well, my parents had saved, you know, it was one of those situations. Someday we'll build a house out of this area and we go somewhere else. So my mother had stashed money away and stashed money away. By the way, after the bombing, when she was out in the courtyard looking for her cutlery in the rubble, she kept saying, I shall never save again. And she didn't. She didn't. She lived comfortably and on what she had, and she made out just fine. But anyway, she had 20,000 Reichsmark. And she said, what am I going to do with this? I'd like to save it. I'd like to save it. So somebody told her about lumber, that you could buy lumber, boards. And it was a capital idea, because with the destruction everywhere, what you needed was building material. Unfortunately, not knowing anything about it, and I don't think my dad was involved, the lumber was stored one on top of the other. And that is, if you know anything about that, it ruins the lumber. You make spaces, air spaces between them. That wasn't the case, so that 20,000 was gone too. Anyway, 1947, the day of the Deutschmark, I was going to school in my ugly yellow boots, and I went past a shoe store. And there were shoes in the window. Can you can't imagine what that felt like. There was stuff all of a sudden. We saw pastry in bake shops. We saw bananas. We saw oranges. Stuff you just were non-existent, because the store owners hoarded things. Of course they couldn't hoard bananas and oranges, but they just didn't bring them because they didn't want to be bothered with that old currency. They kept everything to themselves, for themselves, until they were able to get hard currency for it, okay? So, 40 marks. My dad had 40 marks, my mother had 40 marks. I had 40 marks, my sister. And I don't think the shoes were more than 10 marks or something like that, but I pleaded for please, the first thing. And we had no, think about it, we had lost everything. We had no sheets, we had no towels, we had no dishes. We had bare minimum just to live from day to day, and I wanted a pair of shoes when there was so much else to buy. These are the things that were monumental in my life at the time, okay? Now I'm going to look at my cheat sheet again. Okay, up above us, up above the Speerhaus, up over there was a labor camp. Again, camp for the people that built the underground tunnels and the air raid shelters and all of that. They, at one time, some of them were brought over from the occupied countries like Czech Republic or Poland, and they were housed there. It was all very decent. I've been through there. They had a large canteen, and when the war was over and these people were all able to go back to where they had been abducted from, what came in were the refugees. The refugees from the Slovenland, from areas of Czech Republic that were German, that were not only kicked out by the locals, the Russians were coming in because the Russians took over these countries too. Poland, Czech Republic. They overrolled them just like Hitler had done. These poor people never get out from under, okay? But the Germans that lived there were told, go back to where you belong, go home, okay? So they literally picked up what they could carry. My niece's husband was one of those boys. He was maybe 7 years old, and his family was told, go, leave everything, only what you can carry. Couple of hours, and you leave, you go. On foot, walking. Distances like from here to Connecticut, okay? And his mother, and he told us his mother had a bunt pan under her arm and a bag. Do you believe that? In her befogged mind, she could think of nothing else but this bunt pen that had belonged to her mother, and it was precious, and she was going to take it with her. These tragedies that happen in wars, you see these pictures of Syria. Can you believe this is still going on? I think we had so much war in the last 60 years or such that we would get a little smarter. You don't gain anything, you just lose, and it's always fought on the backs of the civil population, isn't it? Everybody that can't help themselves, it just has to happen to you, and you have to deal with it and see how you get on. But we made it. Anyway, let me see what else I wrote down here. All right. Dad was definitely employed by the American Army. And the place was not up on the tea house. Maybe I have a shot of the tea house. Let's go see if it's somewhere.
Forward?
Forward, yes. That's Hitler in Albert Speer. And this is the bunker that we were, okay, up there. That's a good shot. See that place up there? That's the tea house. There's a road that leads to about 500 feet from the summit. There's a turnout where a car or a bus can turn around. Then you have a tunnel that goes into the mountain that a car can drive in. Have you been there?
Yes.
Yeah. And there's a rotunda where the car can turn around, and there's the elevator up there. Because of the weather conditions, in the winter it was not open for anybody going up there. But because there was so much stuff up in there that the population could steal, and let me tell you, everything that wasn't nailed down was stolen. The house, the Speer house that we moved into, was bare. There wasn't a stick of furniture in there, except in Mrs. Speer's bedroom there were photographs, personal photographs, this thick. I'm not exaggerating. We were walking on photographs. Can you imagine what they would be worth, what they would have been worth? You know what we did with them? We were scared to death to be found with material like that. We burned it in the furnace. It's criminal, but we were scared. We were just, we lived in fear for at least 4 years before the war was over, because we were told continuously, if you don't fight and we don't win this war, if you don't do your bit to make sure that the Germans are going to win this war, don't think you're going to survive. No way. Okay, they're coming, they're killing you, or some other way, but don't expect to outlive a defeat anyway. We thought whoever could catch us with all this stuff, with Hitler on every third picture, and they think we own this, okay? They didn't know us from Adams. They thought we lived here and this was our stuff, so we burned it, okay? All right, that had to be up there in the winter. In the lower area where the elevator is, tell me when I should shut up. It's 8 o'clock already. How long can you stay? Another half hour?
Sure.
Okay, I'll make it short. There
I
was
could stay all night.
oh, too nice. There was a reservoir. There was a submarine diesel as an auxiliary power supply, and the diesel, in order not to break up this mountain, which didn't look extremely stable anyway, they immersed it in a basin of oil, diesel oil, and it absorbed the motion of this thing. Okay, you know what the value was of that oil? Not only that, there were hundreds of yards of copper wiring and anything made out of steel. A farmer would have to have a new implement, couldn't buy it, so he could find a piece of steel somewhere, and he found a blacksmith, they could fashion it. Every goods was marketable. So Dad was up there in the winter, and he had 2 other guys that would relieve him. He'd stay a week, the other guy would up a week, and then the other one. But he would run out of food occasionally, and he had one of those crank phones, one of those field phones, and he, at the base station where this road up there started, a little souvenir shop opened, because it was a roaring good business with the U.S. Army to go up there and see what everything was. And I must admit to you, I had a couple of school friends up there. I'm still in touch with one of them, and we would sit and wait for a victim, okay? And they would come over. We learned English in school. After 10 years, I had my first English lesson, so it was good practice, and I could talk to these guys. And what was this? Well, this was that, and that was the private home of Eva Braun. They believed anything. But in the base station, oh yeah, at one time, it was shameful. We had this little rod, it was this long, it was a rod, and we had found it on the ground because Hitler's house was destroyed. And Eva Braun did live there, and she had a canary. So we said, okay, we said to this one GI, this is a rod out of Eva Braun's canary cage. And he reached in his pocket and he had gum. And he gave us, if you give me the rod, I'll give you all this gum. Oh, we had gum for 5 days. Anyway, but okay, down in that little gift shop was the other half of that telephone. And when Dad ran out of provisions, he'd ring and they'd get in touch with me, and I would I would put on, I get what he wanted, and I had a backpack. And I would start out on foot, because most of the time the snow was heavier at this elevation. And I carried my skis.
Yeah.
I waltzed up there until I couldn't make it anymore on foot, and I put my skis on and waltzed the rest of the way. And because I was so dog tired by the time I get to the parking lot, I was able to turn on the elevator. I went in there and turned a couple of switches, and this machine started up. I felt fabulous. Anyway, and Dad had to, in the evening, I'd stay overnight because he didn't want me to come down the same day, and he would ride down and shut the engine off and scramble up over the snow back into the house. It was interesting life, let me tell you. And then I'd say, I'm not quite so sure, I think it was in 47, that he went up one day, and it was in the spring. And it was March sun melts anything. And the road was, had melted off, and there were guardrails on the most dangerous curves. And they were stone stanchions with big square bowls of wood connecting these, because the precipice was pretty steep down there. Okay, he had a man with him. He was going to make repairs up there, and they were going up the mountainside, and the rocks had cast a shadow, and that was icy. And didn't he get onto the ice with his motorcycle and started sliding right to the edge? And he said to the guy in back, "Jump, jump!" And with that, he went over the side. And he tumbled and tumbled and tumbled, with the motorcycle hitting him once or twice, okay? And when he finally stopped, he called for his buddy, and he didn't answer, so he crawled back up. He had broken ribs, he had a broken shoulder, broken arm, he had a wound in his head, bleeding profusely. But he went up and he found him, and he had died. He had the motorcycle fall on him. Tragic, tragic. He made it on foot, believe it or not, all the way down. And it's 4,500 feet from here down to the valley. And there was an alpine hut where hikers would go to and could stay overnight. And it was open, there was a cook there, and the truck had come to deliver coal, and they said, "What are you going to do with this man?" "Oh, he ain't going to make it anyway." So they, believe it or not, they laid him on top of the coal in the bag, okay? Didn't put him in the cab because he was bleeding so much. He was messing up the cab. Anyway, but he made it. He came through. Anyway, that was an interesting experience. Let me see. What else have I done? All right. All right, okay. 1947, I would say, was beginning 1948. There was this massive amount of denazification going around, okay? We have to hunt these people down that are responsible for the misery that we're in, okay? All right, Dad was a Nazi, I tell you that truthfully. He was without work in 1933 for 3 years, had not a nickel to feed his family, was told if he joined the Nazi party he would get a job. He did, and he got a job. He was convinced it was a good system. And he had this sad, sad story every time something happened that was horrendous. Oh, I told you before, we really, really, really didn't know about concentration camps. And I hope to believe that if the German people had known, there would have been a revolt. I hope so. Anyway, but Dad was not inducted in the army because they needed him to ferry Hitler up there. Every time Hitler went in the elevator, Dad had to stand there and turn the wheel and get him up there. He only went 5 times because he was afraid of height. So the whole dollar thing was for nothing. Okay? Yes. And but Dad, because he had this motorcycle, he wore this gray rubber coat that the SS wore. Okay, the SS were dressed in gray uniforms and everything, and that raincoat that shed water literally like rubber was also gray. So Dad, riding in the open, wore one of those coats. So they said, okay, he was with the SS. Well, Dad was barely 5'2". He would have never made it. But he was definitely not kosher. So he had to come before a tribunal. He and thousands of others. So they investigated and investigated, and they finally nailed him because he was a member in 1933, which was very early in the life of the party. So they sentenced him to a year in prison.
Mhm.
No, 5 years. 5 years. Okay.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah. And into a prison, into a what? In a prison in Landsberg, which was, I would say, like from here to, I don't know, Cape Cod. No, a little further. Anyway, doesn't matter. We visited him on his 50th birthday. And he looked so sad. He had the prison guard on, believe it or not, black and white stripes and all that. But he knew what was going to happen. And he had all the schematics for that elevator, okay? He built the doggone thing. And in this house was a room that was paneled. Supposed to be Hitler's workroom, his office. He had to work up there, ludicrous, okay? But the panels were removable. So Dad put all the panels, all the plans, all the drawings in back of a panel, fixed it up again, nobody would know, and nobody could find any information. Oh, all right, and he had a buddy, and his buddy was Kurt. He was the driver of Emma Göring, okay, and he worked with Father on the elevator on a daily basis, and he said to Kurt, listen, don't do it right away, but if I'm in there for any length of time, why don't you pull a wire here and short out this thing and move this over here, and you will be surprised of the result. Okay. Well, I think Dad was in prison maybe a year, where Kurt figured, okay, now is a good time and they won't nail me for this. He sabotaged the elevator and it didn't work. Okay, so all right, plans, where are the plans? I don't know. I've never had anything to do with the schematics of this thing. Well, okay, where's the man that built this thing? He's in prison. He's in prison? Yes. Political? Yes. Criminal? No. Political? Yes. Okay, let's get him out. We got him out. Okay? And miraculously, 2 days later, the elevator worked. It was a favorite place for anybody that wanted to come and see where all this took place. We were only bombed because they thought Hitler was going to move from Berlin and make this his headquarters. So everybody that had any influence, we had people come. The High Commissioner of all of Germany came, wanted to see what it was like. Absolutely, okay? So the day was safe, the elevator was running, and Dad was out of the hokey. So,
What year did your dad get out of the hokey?
I would say 1948.
Oh, okay.
That's where the war raged, destruction. All right. 75% of the German men did not come back from the war. Some of them had died and others were in Russian prison camps, and the Russians didn't give them up.
No.
They kept them, okay? So these women were alone with their children, no way to earn a living. If you were a teacher, you were lucky. if the school hadn't been hit, okay? But most women at that time, Hitler was preaching a woman's place, kitchen, church, not so much, but children. Definitely children, as many as possible, okay? So a woman didn't have a profession, but you know what they did? Fortunately, it was summer. They sat by the side of the road in their cities and they cleaned bricks. And we call them Trümmerfrauen, that means rubble women. They had this little hammer and they cleaned the bricks and piled them up. And according to how many bricks they had cleaned, they got paid for them and they got ration cards. It was a way to provide, first of all, building material, because everything else was destroyed. They had to use the stuff that was still there. And secondly, it gave these women an income. Okay, talked to my friend a week ago in Munich. And he said, all right, outside of Munich in a park is a huge boulder that they brought from somewhere. Gorgeous piece of granite. And there's a plaque on there in commemoration and thanks to all the rubble women that helped clean up and re-establish Munich. Okay? Fine. I think it's commendable because they had their little kids around them and cleaning bricks day in, day out, if it rained or not, because they needed the money. You know what? There's something going on in Munich right now, protesting against that plaque because some of these women were obviously Nazis. It's sick. It's sad. Okay? As if they had a choice that their husband had to go to war. Anyway, human nature. Anyway, I think I've just about, we finally moved off of that hill when they built a new housing unit down in the village. My mother was never happy in the area anyway, but at least living down in the village was better. And Dad had opportunity to put his name in for an apartment, and we moved. My sister stayed up in that house that I showed you prior because she had married by then and had 2 children. And that's when I met Charlie down in the village. I went to school, finished high school, wanted to be a lawyer. It would have been great, didn't it? Me and my gift of gab. But the only opportunity I had to go into that field was to go into the monastery in Salzburg to begin with philosophy. Believe it or not, that's how you start a law career, study philosophy, and it was deadly. It was like watching paint dry. I stuck it for 2 semesters and then I said, I'll do absolutely anything else but sit here another 3 months and listen to this. But anyway, I got a job with the army in an officer's hotel behind the desk. And I filled out here, there, and everywhere, and that's where I met Charlie, and the rest is history. You're very...
What year was that? What year?
Did I meet Charlie?
Well, I mean, you know, things
50,
changed and you
1950.
moved on, and
1950, and we got
by
married in
1950
53.
things had.
Oh yeah, the
Changed.
Americans tried very hard to feed us, but you know what they gave us, unfortunately. Egg powder, which worked. You could make scrambles. And the other thing that we just couldn't get acquainted with was marshmallows in a jar, and it was so cloyingly sweet, and you couldn't even, we didn't even like it on bread, but they tried. And fluff, yeah. But you know, we survived. Nobody that I know of died of hunger. You just find different ways to cook whatever you can find. We had little gardens, and then little bunny rabbits would come and eat most of it.
Garden.
I must stress the fact that
Did you meet your husband at the General Walker Hotel?
no, General Walker was up on the hill. He
Yeah.
was stationed down in the valley. In the,
Oh, okay.
Okay, I kept
you
thinking.
know the town at all? There was a hotel called Deutsches Haus. That's where he was billeted. He was
Okay.
with the military police.
Oh, okay.
So
Because I had heard that the General Walker Hotel was destroyed.
it
or
was.
torn down.
They torn it down. believe
And
it
the
or not.
SS headquarters was below it, and that's gone?
That was this SS headquarters had been bombed, totally. That,
Okay.
that was destroyed.
Because
But the
we
General
were over
Walker-
there in the 70s, we
Yes.
went up there, and where you're showing,
Yes.
because I was an Army wife,
Yes,
and midway through in 76, my parents came over, and we
Yeah.
went
you went to the Eagle's Nest.
Eagle's Nest, and the
Yeah.
ironic part was our tour bus director, Ingrid, her boss worked with you at Simon's?
No, her husband was stationed at Fort Devens,
Uh-huh.
Okay,
and so they were living on
Bowtell Street?
Bowtell Street in Fitchburg.
It was just so weird. I mean, here we are, and the thing is, and I don't know if it's the same now, but going up there, I just remember the tour bus, and one bus could go up at a time.
And you come to a
And you
space
come
where
to a
one
thing,
fall over.
and my
the
mother
other
was
one came
sitting
down.
over here, and she was always hyperactive. I mean, it was just the three of us.
And you look down there.
And she looked down because the bus, one of the tires got over the thing, and I said, oh my God, we're almost there, and we're gonna tumble
Yeah.
all the way down. And I don't know if it's the
It's a
same.
frightening road, still the same.
It's still the same.
Absolutely, but the guardrails are back up.
Oh, the guardrails.
And it's a money maker. This house is
It's
millions,
beautiful,
2-3 million visitors come every year.
Yeah,
It's a restaurant up in there, and
yeah, it's a little restaurant.
yeah.
And you look down on the clouds, and I thought, this is the most
Oh,
fascinating.
yeah, I must show you that.
Thing.
Jim,
Somewhere.
would
Welcome to
you
the elevator.
come all the way to the last picture? I gotta give that to you. This is my favorite picture in that whole thing. See the house?
Yeah,
So there's no way to get up there, it's just a footpath. It's all inside. Here's the bus, up there's the house, and he fell off somewhere like that.
Oh my
Anyway,
God.
yeah,
yes, and there's the road,
Yeah.
Yeah.
and
And the
some of
elevator.
these footpaths. This is all new. This was here. Has all been added because it's now an eating place, a restaurant. I tell you another really juicy story. Mrs. Borman, would you back up just one? Mrs. Borman was perpetually pregnant. I will give another child to my leader, mein Führer, okay?
Oh,
And she had this innocent idea that if she had high altitude air, the child would be exceptional. So she had a driver take her up, weather permitting, and she had a lawn chair, and she laid in here.
oh,
Okay.
Oh, my God.
Now, there were windows inside the house that you could look down onto this
Sure.
area.
mhm,
And of course, she had to go with a guard, a couple of guards, and then she'd be up there 2-3 hours, and the guards, this is all from my dad, would look out the window, she says, she's still there. And she's been there for so long, she's gone home, my wife says, I ought to be home, and so. But that was how she spent her afternoons. The poor woman died of cancer.
Oh,
After the war, the children were dispersed, there were 9 of them, and the 10th one growing. They were all dispersed everywhere. One of the boys said, I have an uncle in Munich, but it didn't cut any ice. They
Oh.
sent them to farmers, to the oldest daughter married a dentist in Tyrol, died of some, I have no idea what illness. I was in correspondence with one of the girls, but I tell you, what she wrote to me, I just couldn't swallow any longer, so we gave that up. She was under the total illusion that her father was a saint, and he was very far from it. Okay, let's see what we got to the end. That's the cabin, in case you haven't seen this before.
Oh, wait, that's
That's
in
the
the middle?
tunnel, that's the entrance to the to the tunnel in there, and the house is up there.
Now,
You were the one, Billy boy, that did all this for me. Aren't you nice?
Be
Okay.
that, excuse me, the picture on the top is,
That's
top
a-
right,
Yes, this one here is the elevator.
that is the
The
elevator.
cabin.
That's the inside of
And
the
they,
elevator.
okay, they thought it was gold. Would you believe that? When they came there and they saw this, and of course it was brass and it was highly shiny,
Yeah.
okay?
Yeah.
They thought the whole cabin was gold. Can you imagine the weight of this?
Gold.
Anyway,
Yeah, the,
all right, let's see what else we got. That's the entrance. This is a more recent picture. Lots of tourists. That's the tunnel into a rotunda. And here is where Gerda Bormann used to lay. See the windows?
Oh.
You could look down on here.
Oh.
I don't know if it did anything for the kids, but she enjoyed it. There was another room that was called the Naughty Pine Room. Very nice. Look down over the mountains. This is original. Okay. This is all touristy stuff here. That wasn't there. There's the village down below. Okay? And this is the area, we moved out of this, I didn't want to touch on that because it would lead too far. We moved out of the restricted area because my mother kept agitating and agitating. And have you ever had a woman that agitated? She got her wish and we moved in here, that this was all destroyed and they rebuilt it. We moved, let's say, about here. But it was not in the restricted area anymore, okay? Austria is over there. See, it shows you a little bit closer. And that's the lake, Lake Königssee, very pretty, and that's the valley here. Wow. Yeah. A lot of paths, walkways, yes. And a road out here to Sound of Music,
Yeah,
over here, was all filmed in this area. That's where it took place.
yeah.
Yeah. There again, there's the township and there's the river. We lived, when we were bombed out and we went down into a friend's house, let's say we lived around here, a house. And because there was no store in the place and there was no bus service, everything after the bombing, although not one bomb fell, everything stopped. No train service, no bus service, nothing. We walked, my sister, my mother and I, to town, about to here, to see if we could get something to eat. I mean, buy food, anything, whatever, I don't care. I don't know, I
you'll
don't
enjoy
really,
looking at this now. It's so
Yeah.
familiar to you.
yeah, very pretty. That's the township, that's Baptist Garden.
Purchase card.
Is that what it looks like? Because I haven't been there since '76.
This is maybe 8 years old, that photo.
Okay, so,
Yeah, this is a river, this thing here. Okay,
Can I ask her, impart some information? I got there in 1950, and the town, there was two places. One was Birch's Garden and one was Garmisch.
yeah.
And there were rest and recreation areas for all the troops in Yukon. If there's any people from France, we used to get GIs from Austria, Italy, you name it. And I was in the military police, and we rode around the town just to keep everything calm, cool, and collected. It was very good, except we used to get GIs come from Austria. We had to be in uniform all the time. I had 3 Class A uniforms because of my job. But we'd get guys from Austria and they could wear civilian clothing, so we'd have to tell them, get back on the bus and go back and put your uniform on. So they had these 2 areas, and of course there was nothing to go down to the Bahnhof and you'd see a train with 4 stars on it. So possibly General Handy or any other bigwigs, they would come there, they'd ride up and down in the elevator that her dad had put in.
oh, I gotta tell you one,
okay.
while I think of it.
Yeah.
That is up there, okay, I'm living already in the United States for several years. And Chief Justice Earl Warren came up.
Oh,
Okay.
really?
Yes.
Wow.
And Dad was told who he was, and he had so much brass. He said, I have a daughter in the United States. Would you be so kind and sign this card? And he wrote a postcard from up there. He wrote, I'm here with your father on a lovely day, enjoying the sights. Best wishes, Earl Warren.
Another thing we couldn't figure, because of the installation of the fogging equipment that they supposedly had
We
on
had
the Ober
fogging
Salisbury
equipment
to
during
fog
air
the
raids,
area
you know.
in case of a bombing raid.
Oh my God.
So one time we
Didn't
were
work.
watching, if you've ever watched the Antiques Roadshow from England,
Yeah.
all right, they were having this Antiques Roadshow at this big, almost like the one they had in downtown Abbey.
Yeah.
And they had all the things there. And off to the side, there was a photograph about this high and about this wide. And I kept looking at it, and I said to my wife, I says, my God, I think that's the Ober Salisbury.
Yeah.
And sure enough,
Yeah.
there it was, and
They
there was
had-
this red
They
dot
had
where Hitler's
overflights
house
every
was.
day.
Oh my.
So we
Okay.
wondered, how did they do it? And in a previous program, they showed the RAF, they would take these planes, take all the guns out, put in the photographic equipment, and they'd fly over Germany. And this particular house was photo intelligence. They would bring all the photographs
They
there,
knew where
and the
every
guys
place
would-
was and which one to
That's
to
where
hit,
they-
what not to hit.
where
Oh,
they
we gotta make
learned
this
how to
short.
bomb.
Let's just
And sure
roll
enough,
through
that's what
and
they
I
did.
want you
Yeah.
to see the
Yeah.
last shot.
Yeah.
That's my favorite
That's
picture.
And that's done by machines? That's that shot?
This is the clouds.
That's
That's the thing that
Oh,
fascinated
wow.
me the most was
Down
when
there is
Down
that
there,
is
I
gone
said
and
to
it's
my mother,
raining.
I said to my mother and my dad, I says,
Yeah.
we're looking, it almost looked like we were looking down at the ocean,
Yes,
but yet
Yes.
we're at the tea house,
Yes.
we're
You're looking at the
looking
clouds.
at the
it is
clouds,
fabulous.
which are below us.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
like being in a plane,
Yeah,
it
I
was
love
so
this
weird.
show. I love
Yeah.
this picture.
It's
Well,
beautiful.
any more questions? I bored you to death.
Now, you
Very much.
Yes.